They were convinced Christianity was a lie, blind faith, no evidence. But when they set out to disprove it, the facts led them somewhere unexpected. Why would brilliant, evidence-driven atheists abandon their skepticism and embrace Christianity? In this video, we'll reveal 5 former atheists who changed their minds, not because of faith, but because of undeniable evidence. And make sure you watch till the end, because number 3 was an outspoken atheist who tried to disprove Christianity, only to write one of the most famous books defending it. Number 1, CS Lewis. C.S. Lewis was once an outspoken atheist, convinced that Christianity was nothing but a myth. But after a long intellectual battle, he became one of its most influential defenders. A brilliant mind, Lewis was a professor at both Oxford and Cambridge, known for his deep understanding of literature and philosophy. He was also a close friend of J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of The Lord of the Rings, a friendship that would play a crucial role in his journey to faith. For years, Lewis rejected Christianity, believing the universe was cold and meaningless. But one question haunted him. If there was no God, why did humans have a built-in sense of right and wrong? He realized that if morality was real, if some things were truly good or evil, then there must be a standard beyond human opinion. As he later wrote, "A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line." In other words, if objective morality existed, there had to be a moral lawgiver. This realization shattered his atheism. Lewis eventually became a Christian, using his incredible storytelling to share the truth he had discovered. His books, including Mere Christianity and the Chronicles of Narnia, would go on to inspire millions, proving that reason and faith were not enemies, but allies. 2. Lee Strobel. When Lee Strobel's wife became a Christian, he was furious. He thought she had fallen for a religious delusion. As an atheist and a staunch skeptic, he was convinced that faith was built on myths, not facts. Strobel wasn't just any skeptic. He was an award-winning investigative journalist and the legal editor for the Chicago Tribune, trained to expose falsehoods and uncover the truth. Determined to rescue his wife from what he saw as religious deception, he set out on a mission to debunk Christianity once and for all. Using his journalism skills, he focused on the foundation of Christianity, the resurrection of Jesus. If he could prove it never happened, he could dismantle the entire faith. But the deeper he investigated, the more the evidence pointed in the opposite direction. He found overwhelming historical documentation that Jesus' resurrection wasn't just a legend. The Gospel accounts, when examined with legal and journalistic scrutiny, held up as credible eyewitness testimonies. Even more shocking, some of the greatest skeptics of Jesus' time, like Paul, a former persecutor of Christians, and James, Jesus' own skeptical brother, became believers after encountering the risen Christ. Strobel was left with a verdict he couldn't ignore. What he found shocked him so much that he wrote The Case for Christ, a book that has led thousands to Christianity and continues to challenge skeptics today. 3. Francis Collins. Francis Collins led the Human Genome Project, one of the most groundbreaking scientific endeavors in history. He mapped out human DNA, decoding the very blueprint of life itself. And yet, despite his scientific mind, he became a devout Christian. As a medical student, Collins dismissed religion as wishful thinking. He saw faith as irrational, something for people who didn't understand science. But his beliefs were challenged when patients facing death spoke of their faith with unshakable peace. It made him wonder, was there something he was missing? The more he studied, the more the evidence began to change his mind. He was struck by the fine-tuning of the universe, laws of physics so precise that even the slightest alteration would make life impossible. To him, this pointed to an intelligent designer. Then came DNA. As a geneticist, he expected to see randomness in life's code. Instead, he found staggering complexity, billions of letters of precise information, as if written by an author. This wasn't chaos, it looked like an intentional design. Still skeptical, Collins turned to philosophy and read a book, Mere Christianity, by CS Lewis. For the first time, he saw faith not as blind belief, but as a logical conclusion. Collins became a Christian and later wrote The Language of God, arguing that science and faith are not enemies, but partners in discovering truth. 4. Alister McGrath. As a young scientist, Alister McGrath was convinced that atheism was the only logical worldview. He believed science had replaced the need for God, but the more he studied, the more he saw its flaws. McGrath's turning point came when he realized something startling. Atheism wasn't based on solid evidence, it was simply assumed to be true. He had accepted it without questioning, but when he applied the same rigorous thinking he used in science, he found it lacking. Christianity, on the other hand, offered something atheism couldn't. It had deep philosophical insight that made sense of reality, human purpose, and morality in a way that pure materialism never could. Then, as he explored history, he found compelling evidence for Jesus' resurrection, something he had once dismissed without serious examination. The evidence was too strong to ignore. McGrath went from an atheist scientist to a theologian, arguing that faith and reason are not opposites, but allies in the search for truth. Number 5. J. Warner Wallace. J. Warner Wallace was a hardcore atheist. As a homicide detective, he built his career solving cold cases, murders that had gone unsolved for decades. He didn't believe in God, heaven, or the afterlife. But one day he decided to take on the biggest case of all. Did Jesus really rise from the dead? Wallace approached the Gospels like he would a witness statement in a murder trial. He looked for inconsistencies, false testimonies, or signs of a fabricated story. But instead of contradictions, he found something shocking, 4 separate accounts that lined up like independent eyewitness testimonies. Then came the disciples. If they had made the story up, why would they willingly suffer and die for it? People don't endure torture for something they know is a lie. And the resurrection, the evidence pointed to only one conclusion. The disciples truly believed they had seen the risen Jesus. As a detective, Wallace knew that eyewitnesses can be wrong, but they don't all hallucinate the same thing, especially hundreds of people at once. The more he investigated, the more the case for Christianity became airtight. Wallace went from an atheist detective to a committed Christian, writing a book, Cold Case Christianity, to show how forensic science confirms the truth of the Gospels. These 5 brilliant men started as skeptics. They didn't take things on blind faith, they demanded evidence, and what they found led them straight to Jesus. So here's the question. If scientists, journalists, and detectives, experts in logic and proof, were convinced, could it be possible that Christianity is actually true? I want to hear from you. Which story surprised you the most? Tell me in the comments. And if you're curious, don't just take my word for it. Check out The Case for Christ or Mere Christianity. Because the truth, it's worth investigating. See you in the next video.